Chapter 1. Tom, you're finally awake. You had me worried sick. Are you feeling okay? What happened? Why'd you pass out like that? Grace, take it easy. He just woke up. Let him eat something first, before you bombard him with questions. And seriously, you've been up all night. You should take care of yourself too, you know. I blinked, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Right there in front of me, my husband Kevin Stone was holding another woman, his arm wrapped around her like they were close. The shock hit me like a punch to the gut. I shot up, scrambling to the far corner of the bed, my body shaking uncontrollably. The woman, clearly puzzled by my reaction, leaned in. Instinctively, I flinched, bracing myself for a slap. But instead, I felt the cool touch of her hand on my forehead. No fever, she said gently. Tom, what's going on? You're acting strange. Her voice was filled with concern, so soft and kind that it almost unsettled me. I stared at her and then glanced down at my legs that were moving, legs that didn't feel like mine. That's when it hit me. This isn't my body. I've been reborn. And not just reborn into anyone, I'm now Tom Foster, the younger brother of this other woman. In my last life, Kevin and I had grown up as two kids left behind in a small, forgotten mountain village. I'd worked my way out of that place with sheer determination, excelling in school. My grades were leagues ahead of Kevin's, and I knew my future lay far beyond those mountains. But when city recruiters came looking for promising students, I, stupidly, gave up my chance and handed it to him. Kevin had always been good to me back then, and when he cried and begged, I caved. Later, during college, I developed a groundbreaking new drug and secured a major investment. That was when Kevin really started to pursue me, doing everything he could to win my heart. He worked late into the night by my side, doting on me, even taking 3 knife wounds to protect me when someone tried to steal my research. I married him after that, right there in the hospital. For a while, life was perfect. We built a successful business together, supporting each other through thick and thin. But then Grace Foster, the CEO of Foster Group, set her sights on Kevin. She didn't even try to hide it, her pursuit of him was shameless, brazen, right in front of me. Kevin, though, never seemed to waver. He kept telling me not to worry, that I was the only one for him. But in the end, love is cheap when weighed against ambition. Kevin nailed my legs to the floor of our basement with steel spikes, trapping me there. He spread rumors that I had slept my way to the top, trading my body for business deals. At the same time, someone sabotaged my company's secret formula, plunging us into legal chaos. Our stock plummeted, and Grace swooped in, buying up shares for pennies on the dollar. I had made too many enemies in my line of work, 'cause my new drug. So, when they faked my suicide, anyone who questioned the truth was quickly silenced. At my funeral, Kevin stood before the cameras, looking like a shadow of his former self. He wept openly, apologizing to the world for failing me, playing the part of the devastated widower. He cried so hard that he nearly collapsed, with Grace standing by his side, ever the silent, loyal companion. The media ate it up. People love a juicy scandal, especially when it involves the rich. With a little help from the right people, public opinion shifted. Grace and Kevin became tragic lovers, their bond forged in the fires of adversity, while I was reduced to the villain who deserved to disappear. Thinking about it now, the memory no longer made me shake. It just made me cold. The old me? She's gone. And with her departure comes freedom, freedom from fear, from pain. Now, fate has handed me a new life, a new identity. I'm not going to waste it. Kevin, Grace, you're going to pay for everything. Chapter 2. Before I left the hospital, I insisted on a full checkup. After all, the guy I'd taken over had been a reckless party boy, and I wasn't about to let his bad habits drag me down before I got my revenge. Luckily, the results weren't too bad. Aside from a little low blood sugar, everything else was fine. On the way home, the driver dropped Grace off at some fancy dinner party, and as we started heading toward Tom's apartment downtown, I interrupted. "Keep driving. I'm going to the Foster family estate." Kevin, who'd been dozing off, snapped his eyes open at that. Trying to sound casual but clearly curious, he asked, "Going back to grab something, Tom?" The second I heard his voice, my whole body tensed. Just looking at his smug face made my skin crawl. If it were up to me, I'd kick him out of the car and run him over. So yeah, I didn't exactly bother hiding the disgust in my voice. "None of your damn business." His smile faltered, but knowing Tom's usual bad attitude, he let it go and kept his mouth shut. Half an hour later, we pulled up in front of the Foster family mansion, and I had to admit, it was even more over the top than I'd imagined. Sure, I knew the Fosters were rich, but standing in front of this massive, palatial estate, it was something else. No wonder Kevin had been willing to murder me to cozy up to Grace. I thought back to the tiny house Kevin and I had scrimped and saved for, the tears we shed when we'd finally bought it. What a joke. Once I was in Tom's room, I didn't even bother looking around. The first thing I did was grab my phone and start texting. I invited the whole crew over for a party at the Foster estate tonight. Why? Because I'd overheard something interesting earlier. Grace was heading straight out of town after her party, leaving Kevin all alone in this big, empty house. And that gave me the perfect opportunity. Kevin's always had a thing with his nerves. He can't sleep unless everything's completely silent. Grace had even moved them out to this secluded villa and installed soundproofing everywhere, just to make sure her precious Kevin got his beauty sleep. Well, if Kevin wasn't going to sleep tonight, I was going to make damn sure I had a good time. By 2 a.m, the speakers were set up on the lawn, right below Kevin's window. We cranked the music up to full blast, and the party really kicked off. The sound tore through the quiet night like a bomb going off. Within minutes, there was a loud thump from upstairs as Kevin crashed out of bed in shock. I could hear it all the way downstairs. Grinning, I grabbed the mic and led everyone singing in some impressively loud. It didn't take long for Kevin to stumble downstairs. His face was pale, and his eyes were bloodshot. Clearly, he hadn't been sleeping well for a while. He pulled me aside, trying to act like the responsible adult in the room. "Tom, do you know what time it is? I've got work tomorrow. You've got to keep it down." I smirked. And that's my problem, because this is my house. Do I really need your permission to throw a party? Kevin's jaw clenched. "Tom, watch your tone. If your sister knew how you're acting right now, she wouldn't be happy." I let out a laugh. "Oh, so now you're trying to hide behind my sister?" My voice was loud enough to catch the attention of a few of my friends, who wandered over to see what was going on. They'd all heard bits and pieces about the drama surrounding the Fosters. But no matter how much of a mess Tom was, he was still one of them. Kevin? He was just the guy who'd married in. One of my friends chuckled. "Wow, I thought some stray dog wandered in here, barking its head off. But turns out it's just Kevin." Another one added, "Nah, man, you've got it wrong. If the Fosters had a dog, it'd be purebred. No way they'd keep some mutt from the sticks." Come on, guys, don't insult dogs like that. They don't deserve to be compared to a sleazy guy who cheats his way to the top. The group burst out laughing. Kevin's face turned an ugly shade of red. He was the kind of guy who cared way too much about appearances, and now, being humiliated in front of some of the most influential people in town, he was stuck. He couldn't yell at them, and he sure as hell couldn't kick them out. His face contorted in rage, and before I knew it, he fainted right there on the spot, collapsing like a sack of bricks. I nudged his limp body with my foot, a satisfied smile tugging at my lips. This was just the beginning, my dear husband. Chapter 3. Over the next few days, I made it my personal mission to torment Kevin. Every time he was about to fall asleep, I'd find a way to jolt him awake, loud noises, sudden bangs, you name it. And when he tried to escape by holing up at the office, I went the extra mile. I had nothing but time and money, so I'd bring a few friends and stake out in the company's break room, waiting for the perfect moment to strike in the middle of the night. Whenever he tried to complain or got so furious he couldn't contain it anymore, my friends would shrug and say with mock innocence, "Come on, Kevin. We're just a bunch of kids having some harmless fun. Surely a man of your stature wouldn't take it personally?" That always shut him up. He'd just stand there, his face red, too angry to speak, like he was choking on his own rage. Kevin never slept well, to begin with, and after a few nights of this, he looked like a ghost. He'd lost weight, his eyes were bloodshot, and at the office, he was a mess. The employees, who never liked him much to begin with, were starting to openly talk about how he didn't deserve his position. When Grace got back from her business trip, she nearly had a heart attack when she saw him. "What happened to you?" Kevin, ever the actor, just shrugged it off. He even played the loving husband card, rubbing her shoulders and giving her a sweet smile like nothing was wrong. I turned away, rolling my eyes. What a performance. The thing with Kevin is he's not the kind of guy who just lets things go. He'd swallow his pride for now, but I knew he was already plotting his next move. He'd strike back, and when he did, he'd want to make sure it hurt. But that was fine with me. I was counting on it. Sure enough, a few days later, a problem came up at the lab. Some important data had gone missing. Grace was livid. She launched a full investigation, pulling up security footage to figure out what had happened. But instead of finding out who took the data, she stumbled on something else, footage of me and my friends messing with Kevin late at night. That got me a one-way ticket to the study, where Grace was waiting, practically foaming at the mouth. She slammed her hand on the desk. "This is ridiculous. I've let you get away with so much, but how dare you bring people into the company to harass your brother-in-law? Do you have any idea how serious this is?" Kevin, sensing an opportunity, stepped forward with a saintly expression. "It's okay, Grace. Tom didn't mean any harm. I'm fine. I'm just worried that maybe, with all this commotion, someone might have used the distraction to steal the lab data." Grace's temper flared again at the mention of the missing data. "Stop defending him. He's completely out of control. Do you even understand how important that data is? Kevin's been working on it for months. And with all the security in place, no one should have been able to get near it. This has never happened before. But the moment you start hanging around the company, bam, data goes missing. Do you have any idea what kind of damage this could do if it was stolen by a competitor?" Her voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. I grimaced, more from the noise than the accusations. "Come on, it's just some useless files. If they're gone, just do them over. It's not the end of the world." Grace looked like she was about to explode, and Kevin, ever the opportunist, jumped in with a wounded tone. "Tom, you don't understand what we're dealing with here, and that's fine. But don't belittle my work like it's meaningless." I raised an eyebrow and then smiled. "Who says I don't understand?" Both of them stared at me, confused. I leaned back casually. "I probably understand more than you think. Or have you forgotten, sis? Sure, I've been screwing around, but I still graduated from one of the top pharmaceutical schools. The moment I took over Tom's life, I knew I had been given a rare opportunity. Not just because of his status as the Foster family heir, but because of his academic background. It was going to make things very convenient for me. Tom might have been a slacker, but he had a natural talent for biochemistry. He only got into that prestigious school because his family threatened to cut off his credit cards, but the fact remained, he got in. And even though he didn't learn much, no one else needed to know that. If I were to take down Kevin and Grace, the best way to do it would be through the lab. And Kevin, being the idiot that he was, had just handed me the perfect opportunity. "Give me 3 months, I said, looking straight at Grace. I'll get you better data than what you lost. Think of it as an apology." Grace frowned, clearly uncertain. The company wasn't some playground where I could just mess around. And Tom didn't exactly have a stellar reputation. Sensing her hesitation, I looked over at Kevin. "What's wrong, brother-in-law? Afraid I'll show you up and take your job?" Kevin scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Grace, if Tom's serious, why not let him try? He might actually learn something for once. God knows he needs a reality check before he embarrasses the family even more." Grace paused, thinking it over. Finally, she sighed. "I'm not expecting any miracles. But if you can follow Kevin around for 3 months and actually learn something, I guess that'll be progress." I smirked, lowering my eyes to hide the satisfaction that was building inside me. "Oh, don't worry, sis. I'll make sure you're not disappointed." Chapter 4. Monday morning, I was up early, following Kevin into the lab. As I wandered around, casually taking it all in, I couldn't help but whistle under my breath. Now I understood why Grace kept Kevin around, even though he was essentially useless. The lab was packed with top-tier equipment and staffed by the best in the field. All Kevin had to do was present their hard-earned results as his own, and he'd look like a genius. It was the perfect setup for someone like him. After dumping me in the lab, Kevin didn't bother to stick around. He vanished without so much as a word, and the rest of the lab crew? They barely looked at me. It was obvious they'd been warned in advance. No one even made eye contact. But that didn't bother me. I knew my way around a lab. I didn't need their help. Kevin, always one for appearances, had at least set up a workstation for me, a desk, a computer, and even some lab space. Of course, the computer was completely wiped. Not a single file in sight. Good thing I'd prepared. I had already asked Grace for the data I needed to get up to speed on the current experiments. I'd spent the previous night reviewing the material, so I knew exactly where the project stood and what problems needed solving. I grabbed the necessary samples and prepared to dive into the protein analysis. But just as I was getting started, a sharp voice cut through the air. "What do you think you're doing?" I looked up to see a middle-aged woman striding toward me. She smacked my hand away from the test tube and snatched it from me like I'd just committed a crime. "Who gave you permission to touch anything in here? I don't care if you're the CEO's brother or the board's golden child. If you got in here through connections, and then sit down and stay out of the way." I blinked at her and then glanced around. The rest of the lab techs were giving me dirty looks, clearly enjoying the show. Right on cue, Kevin strolled in, perfectly timed as always. He put on his best apologetic smile and said, "Oh, Dr. Taylor, I'm so sorry. This is Tom, Grace's younger brother. He's just curious about the lab, that's all. No need to worry." If looks could murder someone, Dr. Taylor would have buried Kevin 6 feet under right then and there. "I don't care if he's her brother or her husband," she snapped. "This lab isn't a playground for unqualified people." Kevin shrugged and sighed dramatically. "You've all heard the story by now, I'm sure. About the data that went missing because someone let outsiders into the company? Well, Tom's promised that he can produce better results in 3 months, so let's just see what happens." The murmuring started immediately. Lab workers began whispering to each other, not even bothering to keep their voices down. 3 months? Yeah, right. He's just going to take credit for our work. Ugh, another one of these entitled rich kids. Can't they just fight their little power struggles somewhere else? As if one clueless big shot wasn't bad enough. Now we've got the family fool playing scientist. Fantastic. I heard every word. Kevin, of course, was trying to stir the pot, playing the innocent bystander while pushing all the right buttons to make everyone in the lab hate me. But I didn't bother responding. It would be a waste of breath. In the lab, results spoke louder than words. Calmly, I pulled up the company's internal software on the computer and showed Dr. Taylor the access documents. "Everything I'm using was approved through official channels," I said. "Whether or not you agree with it is irrelevant. As for your concerns about me messing things up, why don't you wait until my experiment is done before passing judgment?" I grabbed the test tube back from her while she stood there, temporarily stunned, and went back to work, ignoring the glares from the other staff. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Kevin approach. He leaned in close and whispered, "Tom, you really shouldn't have ticked off Dr. Taylor. She's the most respected person here. One word from her, and Grace will have you out of the lab in no time. Enjoy your last few days here." His voice was dripping with smug satisfaction. I offered him a sweet smile. "Thanks for the tip." And then, without missing a beat, I picked up the thickest book on the desk and dropped it right on his foot. Kevin let out a loud, high-pitched yelp that echoed through the lab. "Oh, oops," I said innocently. "Slipped. Sorry about that. But hey, Kevin, maybe you should worry about your own problems instead of mine." Kevin limped away, muttering curses under his breath, while I returned to my work, enjoying the moment far more than I probably should have. Chapter 5. I knew Kevin would run straight to Grace the moment he got home, probably twisting today's lab incident to make himself look like the victim. But honestly, I couldn't be bothered. I was back in the lab, working on the project that Kevin had once stolen and sold off to the Foster family. I didn't have time for his petty drama. I was too busy enjoying the fact that I could finally finish what I started. Every day, I was the first one in and the last one out, practically living in the lab. I spent all my time revising the experimental plans, tweaking the formulas, and pouring myself into the work. As it turns out, nothing earns respect in a lab like competence. Dr. Taylor, who had previously been a bit cold toward me, took notice after I submitted my first report. Her attitude shifted completely. Suddenly, we were having long, in-depth discussions about the project, and it felt like he regretted not working with me sooner. Meanwhile, Kevin was fuming. He'd been with the Foster group for years, and none of these brilliant minds had ever really taken him seriously. Yet here I was, barely 2 months in, and I was already getting along with everyone. What really got under his skin, though, was that my drug formula was undeniably better than his. I could see the frustration building every time he looked at me, his jealousy practically radiating off him. But I stayed focused, injecting the compound I'd been working on into the test subject, fully confident in the results. 3 months is a ridiculously short time to develop a new drug, and Grace hadn't expected much from me. She probably just wanted me to lay low for a while. But to her surprise, I actually delivered some impressive data. During the next team meeting, Dr. Taylor couldn't stop praising me in front of the entire management team. She even suggested that I take over as the lead for the project. Kevin's smile looked more like a grimace, but before he could object, I graciously turned down the offer. "Thank you, Dr. Taylor," I said, keeping my tone polite. "But Kevin has been leading this project from the beginning. I think he's far more qualified than I am to see it through." Kevin practically sagged with relief, grateful that I wasn't trying to steal his thunder. Grace, on the other hand, was beaming. She seemed to think my decision was a sign of maturity. She even rewarded me with a hefty $8 million and told me to take some time off to go out and enjoy myself before starting a new project. I knew what she was really doing, trying to give Kevin some breathing room, to let him keep a bit of dignity in the lab. But whether or not he could actually hold on to that dignity, well, that was another question entirely. Chapter 6. I know Kevin far too well. He's the type of guy who'll stop at nothing to get what he wants. Sure, he might smile and praise me in front of others, but it's all part of his plan. He just wants me to keep working hard in the lab so he can ride my coattails and take the credit. Of course, the moment I stepped out of the lab, he swooped in and claimed all my work as his own. But that wasn't enough for him. He had to go and tinker with the new drug formula I'd designed, adding random stuff in a desperate attempt to blur the lines, to make it look like the success was all his doing. What he didn't know was that I saw him coming from a mile away. 4 months later, disaster struck. The bacteria we'd cultivated, perfectly healthy up to that point, suddenly perished. Worse, some of the most critical samples were contaminated. When we checked the records, it became clear Kevin was the only one who'd touched them recently. He hadn't let anyone else near the samples. Dr. Taylor was already on thin ice with him. Kevin didn't know the first thing about what we were doing, yet he strutted around like he ran the place, all because of his connections. She'd tolerated him this long only because foster group's funding gave her and her team the freedom to keep working. But now? After months of hard-earned progress, Kevin had wrecked everything. Dr. Taylor was beyond livid. She stormed straight into Grace's office to let her know exactly how she felt. What started as a complaint turned into an all-out rant. By the time she was done, she'd spilled every stupid thing Kevin had done since day one. Grace, who prided herself on the company's research, had only let Kevin into the lab because he'd convinced her he'd been instrumental in developing new drugs at his previous job. Now, the reality was slapping her in the face. When Kevin finally got called into Grace's office, her expression was like a thundercloud about to burst. What the hell is going on? We were so close to a breakthrough, and now the whole project's falling apart. Look at these data sheets, they're all over the place. What exactly have you been doing? Kevin's eyes darted around nervously. He'd only made a few harmless tweaks to my formula, just enough to make it look like he'd contributed. How could that have caused the whole experiment to collapse? But with Grace glaring at him, he panicked. He had no choice but to try and push the blame onto me. Grace, listen, maybe the issue was with the original plan. It could have had flaws from the start, and we just didn't see the effects until now. Grace. Dearest sister. Mind sending me some more cash? That was my cue. I'd gotten wind of the mess, and I timed my entrance perfectly, swinging open the office door right as Kevin was digging himself deeper. Grace shot me a look. We're in the middle of something. Don't you have any sense of timing? I waved her off, completely unfazed. Oh, come on, it's just family here. No big deal. Hey, Dr. Taylor. Long time no see. What's got you so worked up? You're looking a little flushed. Dr. Taylor handed me the file, her expression dark. Tom, you're just in time. Take a look for yourself. All your hard work? Gone, thanks to this mess. I flipped through the pages, a small smile tugging at my lips. This was exactly what I'd expected. Turning to Kevin, I put on my best wounded expression. Come on, Kevin. That's not fair. I put a lot of effort into this. Kevin, ever the shameless one, shot back, how is this my fault? It was your plan that had issues. I followed the steps exactly. And don't forget, if you hadn't let outsiders into the company before, none of my data would have gone missing. If things had gone according to plan, we'd be done by now. The man had no shame. No matter how much he tried to pass the blame, Dr. Taylor wasn't having it. She flat out refused to let him stay in charge of the project. In the end, Grace had no choice but to send me back to the lab, much to Kevin's annoyance. As for him, he got quietly reassigned to another project group. When we got home, Kevin was furious, slamming doors and throwing things around. He and Grace, who were usually inseparable, ended up in a huge argument. I mean, I get it. The new drug was almost finished, and now, at the last minute, Grace had taken the spotlight away from him. It was like ripping out his heart. Meanwhile, I was stretched out on the couch, sipping coffee and thoroughly enjoying the show. A few days later, Kevin seemed to pull himself together. He was back to his usual charming self, playing the dutiful husband, the perfect gentleman. Grace, feeling bad, tried to make it up to him with little perks here and there, both in and out of the office. But now that I was back in the lab, there was no way I was going to let him coast by. Within a month, every project Kevin was overseeing hit a wall. The problems were so big that even the other board members got wind of it and started questioning Grace. Kevin, of course, tried his usual tricks to shift the blame. But this time, the entire lab revolted. They demanded his removal. Foster Group stock took a nosedive, and under the pressure, Grace had no choice but to pull Kevin from his position. Without his title, Kevin was nothing. People in the company started whispering about him behind his back, and it was clear he was losing his grip. I thought he'd stay down for a while, maybe wallow in self-pity. But to my surprise, it only took him 2 days to bounce back. He bought Grace flowers, set up a candlelit dinner, and pulled out all the stops to win her over. But if you looked closely, you could tell something had changed. Chapter 7 One night, while Grace was on a business trip, I invited Kevin to a private club. Kevin, tough days, huh? My sister only listens to those nerds, not even trusting family. He eyed me warily, but didn't show it. Tom, you're joking. I have to take responsibility for lab issues. Grace means well. But aren't you tired of being under a woman? His eyes changed, and I knew I had him. I heard you worked under your ex-wife, and now my sister. You're a top graduate, but your ex gets all the credit. Even now, you can't stay out without her watching. No freedom, no status. A man living under a woman's thumb, isn't that pathetic? My words hit Kevin hard. He glared at me like a snake. What are you implying? That I'd betray Grace for a few words? Tom, you're naive. I didn't respond, just pressed a button. A plain-looking woman entered, placing documents on the table. Mr. Foster, the shareholders have signed. Kevin's head shot up, recognizing her. Rebecca? I chuckled. I knew Kevin's heart had a soft spot for a childhood crush, Rebecca. She wasn't particularly beautiful, but her bright smile had left a lasting impression on the young Kevin. A true honey trap isn't a sexy beauty, but an unattainable crush. Finding someone who matched his memory took effort. I waved my hand, bringing Kevin's attention back. Kevin, let's cooperate. I'm just a rich kid living off dividends. Grace wants to control the Foster family and use my skills for profit. It's too much. I know you don't trust me, so I've had shareholders agree to transfer my shares to you. Just bring Grace down, and I'll take 8% dividends annually. I pushed the woman towards him. This is Rebecca, and the house Grace will never find. My gift to you. Chapter 8 Everyone has a price. Kevin was no exception. After a month of hesitation, he couldn't resist and visited the city villa. Since the lab incident, Grace was disappointed in Kevin, but he won her back with his charm. Grace trusted and loved Kevin deeply. Even when her instincts told her something was wrong, she ignored them. The calm before the storm was deceptive. When I received news that the decoy was pregnant,